Hola. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I think that we are missing the speaker. Sí. No te lo ha mandado. Y, claro, tenemos la charla del lunes y la del martes, pero hoy no. Vale. De hecho, um, hello. We have a question for the next speakers who are going to be Madalena Sass is here. Yes. Do we have your talk? Not yet. No, don't worry. We have the speaker. You can, if you have it, you can send it, and we will put it. Have you already done it? Is it already sent? No, okay. So okay, and Alejandro, the last speaker, is not here yet. Okay, never mind. Sí, sí. Okay, so I'm super happy to introduce the next speaker, Victor Buendia, who's a brilliant physicist, and I'm sure the talk is going to be great. He's going to talk us about mesoscopic theory for coupled stochastic oscillators. So the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. So it's a pleasure for me to be here at Granada, the place where I was born, and I did also half of my PhD here. And so I'm really grateful to the organizers for letting me the opportunity to talk about my latest research, which is funny because I work usually in theoretical neuroscience, but what the results I'm going to present now are more theoretical results that are, let's say, inspired by some of the technical problems that I faced when I was studying these kind of systems. So I want to talk mainly about oscillators and synchronization today. And one of the reasons why I want to do this is because they are found everywhere. So, you have synchronization of fireflies. It's a very beautiful thing. In Spain, we are more worried about now stability and fluctuations in power grids. You find also these problems in superconducting systems like Josephson functions. It's very important for circadian rhythms to entrain our brain to external signals. And if we go to the brain, we have at different scales we can find oscillations. So either if you want to see organoids, in vitro neurons, large scale brain recordings, all of them present some kind of oscillation. So in order to try to understand these systems, what we have to do is to develop tailored models that are able to tell us how we're going to deal with synchronization. Luckily, we have a lot of tools that allow us to study synchronization and oscillations in a very systematic way, and these are couple oscillator models. So in these models, what we usually have is some kind of network which connects our nodes, and each node is going to have an angle variable which is periodic from 0 to pi, and we have some dynamics for the angular variable. What I'm showing here is a simple description of the Kuramoto model. So what we have is on one side a coupling term that tries to make all the oscillators to go together, to synchronize, and then we have a noise term that will try to spread out the oscillators, and these are, let's say, two competing forces. Now, for the classical Kuramoto model, this dispersion usually comes in heterogeneity in the frequencies. You can see here for the people who have worked with this model before that I'm considering all the frequencies to be equal. So the frequency heterogeneity in this case is played as, somehow by the role of the noise. But what I'm going to say, it will be very similar also if you remove the noise and leave only the heterogeneity. How do we study synchronization? Is by means of order parameters. What we have are the order parameters, this ZK, they are called the Kuramoto diode order parameters. A lot of people use only the first one with k equal to 1. And this is because if we write these parameters, the first one is telling us about the level of synchronization that we have on the amplitude, and its phase, it's the average phase of the system. So all of these parameters are complex numbers, so we need, let's say, two numbers in order to characterize them, and in the case of the first Kuramoto diode parameter, this has this physical information. But it's important to keep somehow track of all these parameters, because as Pedro Mariano was saying yesterday, if you have 2 or 3 oscillators, for example, with only the first Kuramoto parameter, you are not able to track all the different possibilities. However, when you have all these parameters, you are able to have a lot of information about how your system behaves. What I'm going to do for this talk, and this is one of the strongest assumptions I'm going to make, is that we have a mean field description. So everybody's connected to everybody, and we have a common weight of connection. So this allows me to take and map our interaction term to this mean field coupling. So what we have in effective terms is a single oscillator which is coupled to. So the behavior of these kind of systems, for those of you who maybe are not familiar with them, is that depending on the strength of the coupling, the amount of synchronization can be nothing. And in this, I'm showing it in the neuroscience way, in which I will have time in the x-axis, and then in the y-axis, I'm putting a dot for each oscillator that passes through a fixed phase. And on the other phase, what we have is all oscillators will be, let's say, spiking or crossing the same phase at the same time, so they are synchronized. And what we will have in the middle is a synchronization. So I got interested into this system because when I was at Granada during my PhD, we were trying to study statistical physics of these couple oscillators, and we were interested in it. So usually the idea that we have in statistical mechanics is that you have a microscopic model, and either you can do direct simulation to obtain the phase diagram, and you can also do simulations for critical exponents universality class at the critical point, which is usually a very interesting dynamical state. I will talk about that in a minute. But the mathematical tools that we have developed in statistical mechanics allow us to have some kind of low-dimensional description just using the dynamics of the order parameters and the fluctuations of these order parameters. So loosely speaking, from simple bifurcation theory, we can construct these phase diagrams, and then the shape that the noise has gives us a lot of information about these critical exponents, universality class, and how the model behaves when we are at a bifurcation or at a phase transition. So we are interested in these critical points mainly because in biology they appear from time to time because of their large susceptibility, long scale correlations, dynamic range, which are properties that biological systems usually like to have because evolutionary they gave them an advantage. And we have several examples like flocking, percolation in bacteria, and a lot of them that you can find in the very nice review written by Miguel Angel some years ago. And of course, we have also in neuroscience some limited evidence that the brain might be posed at a critical state. So we are interested in getting to know what is the dynamical regime of the different dynamic of the systems that we are studying. And if we are close to a critical point, we could say that we could try to link this or match this to biological function in this case. In the case of synchronization, and we were interested in the case of the brain, there was a model by Serena Di Santo, who is probably sitting around there, in which they were looking at these avalanches, which is one of the main markers that we find in experiments in the brain for criticality, close to a synchronization transition. So part of what I did is to write an even simpler version of a model that mimics the behaviors of Di Santo. And what we have in here is just similar to the typical Kuramoto model, but with excitability. So this term that I have in a red box is just gives some excitability, so it mimics the behavior of the neuronal tissue. So using the common tools that we have for oscillatory systems, and I'm going to talk about them in a minute too, what we can do is to construct a macroscopic description. So these threads, I remind you, are the order parameters, these Kuramoto divided parameters. And if I know them all, then I have, this will be like knowing the canonical description of our system. So let's say I just need to solve an infinite set of differential equations, and then I have all the information I ever need from my system. One thing that we can do, for example, is to do some bifurcation analysis, and we have a phase diagram as a function of two of the parameters fixing the others. And this is a relatively complicated phase diagram. It features also some codimension 2 bifurcations, for example. But the problem is that the standard machinery that we had, and this is something that was very inconvenient during my PhD, does not give any information about the noise or fluctuations. So how do these order parameters fluctuate? I do not know. So I have no information about the universality class. And if I want to know if the brain is critical and what are the critical exponents, because this is what everybody is measuring in experiments, here I cannot do it third. The only way I can do this is to simulate the microscopic model again and again with very long simulations, very costly computationally. So this is really a big issue. So I was thinking about this problem, and it's bothered me for a pair of years. And this is the shameless publicity moment in which I tell you, okay, I have been thinking about this and I found a potential solution. So the idea, and I told you I will tell you how the machinery of a couple oscillator works, is that we want to get the density of oscillators that are at a certain phase at a given time. So if I have this, I have the whole information about my system. Instead of using the Fokker-Plan equation, which will be the typical thing, here I want to invoke the Dean-Kawasaki equation. This is a, let's say, less popular version of Fokker-Plan equation. But the thing is that it has a term which you might recognize like a usual Fokker-Plan description, and it has a stochastic term. So it tells us how the density of oscillators fluctuate over time, and it's a demographic noise with a derivative which usually it's very difficult to work with even numerically. However, in this case with the oscillators, since the angle is a periodical function, what we can do is just to do Fourier decomposition. And it turns out that these threads are the coefficients of the Fourier decomposition of the density. So the thing that I put in blue that I do not bother to write is basically what everybody has been doing all these years, right? There is, for example, the equations I put in my previous slide that everybody knows how to derive just from the focus plan. And then there is a new noise that is the one that comes from the part that is in green. And it is not a simple shape of the noise. It is Gaussian. You can demonstrate that this is exactly a Gaussian process. It is, does not have higher order moments. It is correlated, so we have, the theta is a complex number, I remind you, so we have real and imaginary parts, so you will have correlations for it. And it is also multiplicative, so these x and y are real and imaginary parts of the theta case. So what we see is that each one of the harmonics of this Fourier decomposition fluctuates coupled to other harmonics. Okay. So in oscillators also there is the an ansatz that has been useful for a long time because it simplifies the fact that I have to solve an infinite number of equations. So if I do this ansatz, I will only have just one for the first parameter of the parameter. It will allow us to simplify all of the noise, and we will be very happy. However, it's just approximate when we have these stochastic systems, so it can give us qualitative information, but not very good quantitative information. However, sometimes it's very useful to do some qualitative analysis. Now, I want to highlight some properties of these fluctuations. They are complicated, so I try to analyze them. One very interesting thing is that if I write the system not as the derivative of this theta, which is a complex number, but the derivative of amplitude and phase of this complex number, this is just a change of variables. This is a stochastic system, multiplicative noise. I have to invoke Ito's lemma. And Ito's lemma gives us an extra term, which is something divided by n. So these are finite size corrections that we get for free while studying this kind of system in a very, very simple way. Another interesting thing is that if we go, for example, to full synchronization, the amplitude of the noise in the radial part will vanish. This means that entire phase space that our complex numbers can have is they are inside of the unit circle, because when they get to r equal to 1 is full synchronization, and you cannot get more than 100% synchronization. So if you start getting to the edge of this phase space, the fluctuations will start getting smaller and smaller in the radial direction, and in r equal to 1, they will be moving only tangential to the circle. So you can never get unphysical values. And this is very important because in many models, for example, for whole brain modeling, something like that, when oscillators are used, since nobody knew how to deal with these fluctuations, people would just add, for example, just white noise. And if you are close at some point to this kind of description, it will give unphysical values of the parameter. So I want to give you two small examples of how this thing applies to actual models, because so far I have been talking a bit about the Kuramoto model, but what I have said about the fluctuations will be general and stands for any model that is subject to the actual models. So there is first one interesting thing in the Kuramoto model that is, I will not enter into details now, but it suggests when you do the equations with the finite sizes is that we can apply this ansatz. That is, all the phases, the kth phase is just the k multiplied by the psi1. This will be what you obtain in the Oud-Antonsen ansatz, but instead of applying to everything, just to the phases. And the reviewer was not believing this. I didn't offer any, just some theoretical arguments, but I just assumed it and went forward with it, and then the reviewer was not happy. So at the end, I had to do these graphs in which I demonstrate that actually the Oud-Antonsen ansatz phase for the amplitudes, but it's exact for the phases. So after this, he was very happy. When we do this, it is very important because we can have our system that each variable is a complex number. Now, just we can work again with real numbers, which are the amplitudes of these oscillators, and these are the ones that tell us the amount of synchronization that we are going to have. So we are very good. So this is how the equation looks full form for the Kuramoto model, including the fluctuations, finite size effects. Everything is color coded, so you don't have to look at the detail of every equation. And the important thing to analyze this, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to take out the finite size effects and the noise. So this is the typical theory that you find. Actually, this equation I think is in the textbook by by Bikowski. The only difference is that we got rid of the phases because this of this answer. So I can look for fixed points, and looking for fixed points is a recurrence relation that I can solve exactly actually, and gives me a good approximation for the Kuramoto parameter that works better than other approaches that we have been having, like the Odd-Antonsen ansatz, for example, which is the typical thing. There was perturbation theory to the Odd-Antonsen ansatz, like the one done by Tukina, Goldoni, and so on. And then you have in red is the formula that I'm plotting this. So this works fairly well, and we have close analytical solutions, which, for example, the green line is not just a numerical integration. Now, one of the most important things here I want to remark are the finite phase effects. So I am able to describe the phase behavior of the amplitude behavior of the Kuramoto model for down to 100 oscillators, which is very small system size. And this will be very important because if I want to, for example, model neural population, and these neural populations that have an infinite number of neurons, now I can do it in an exact way, which was not possible before. Even more, I can add fluctuations to this and see how are the distributions of probability, for example, of synchronization. And in this graph, you cannot see very well the black line and the dark green line, which would be the full theory against the simulations, because they almost overlap and maybe not that much in the critical point. But this graph also, I tried to match the distributions that I obtained in the simulations of the Kuramoto model with just adding a simple additive noise to see is really this complication of the multiplicative noise really necessary? Can I just put some additive noise? The answer is no. Especially if you go to synchronized regimes, you need to have the multiplicative noise. And then this allows us, of course, to compute the critical exponents from the theory, because we have the order parameters, including fluctuations. So here you have the exponent that for the susceptibility that was for the classical Kuramoto model with heterogeneities. There was a bit of debate about if this was one and equal on both sides or not equal on both sides. There has been some discussion about that. So here I can show with a very good degree of precision that this is one on both sides. And this is a very good thing because in order to get this graph, I just needed to integrate maybe 20 of these harmonics of this third case. I didn't have to get a system with size 1 million of oscillators or something like that. This is just 20 equations that I integrated, so it saves me a lot of computation time. My last 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I will also show some results more close to neuroscience, talking about theta neurons. So the idea of theta neurons, this was a very, very brilliant idea by Diego Castro, Desmond Brion, and Alex Singh, that we can study neurons that are of the type of quadratic integrate and fire. So this is an integrate and fire model, and usually these models are very difficult to deal with theoretically because you need to put some kind of cutoff condition for the neural integration. Once you have the spike, you have to manually reset this voltage, this V variable in order to continue the integration. So what we have here is some deterministic thing, and then we put white noise, the rest of the rule. And one of the interesting things here is that if you do a change of variables, this model gets transformed into change included here to a phase model which represents, it's exactly the same as the quadratic integrate and fire, but I don't have to deal with the annoying reset rule. So it is, let's say, computationally way more way more amenable to theoretical manipulation. The problem here is that we have multiplicative noise, not additive noise like the previous case. Luckily, the theory also deals with this problem. It's not a big deal. The only thing is that the manipulation of the algebra becomes a bit tedious, so I will not go into a lot of details here. But you can do exactly the same I have been doing for the Kuramoto model, and you can apply the theory to obtain some description for the order parameters, which is a deterministic thing, plus some equations. And I will, for simplicity, I will assume here the Odd-Antonsen ansatz, which we know it is not exact, but will allow us to have some insights of what's going on here, and it is allows me also to compare directly with the results of Patron and Toxin. So the interesting thing here is that when I do the map, and there is a map between the average firing rate and average memory potential with the Kuramoto of the parameter, allows me to go back, let's say, to physiological variables after studying the oscillators. And the universality class of the noise would be slightly more complicated, but I'm showing here like lowest order, which would be for universality class, has two surprises. First of all, the correlation between the firing rate and the memory potential in the Odanton ansatz is zero. So this means basically that this is a very surprising result because in theory they could be correlated, but the result is they are not. And also we have demographic noise in the rates, which is exactly the ingredient that we need in order to have directive percolation universality class and have the avalanches and all the kind of stuff. And I think, and maybe Miguel Angel will correct me later, but there are very few models I could not think of any in which you could go from the very microscopic state and demonstrate that in the collective behavior, the noise is formally scoped for neuroscience. It is possible to generalize this for the whole hierarchy of Kuramoto-Daido parameters. So if you don't want to apply the Odanton ansatz, you don't need to. And this is very interesting because it allows us to obtain exact representations for the firing rates and memory potential. So I can compute autocorrelations functions of the firing rate, which are experimentally accessible, without having to in an exact way without having to simulate 1 million neurons. I can just simulate 20 other parameters and do it. So I will end now. The highlights is that this is a new theory. It allows us to have stochastic fluctuations and finite size effects. It also works, by the way, with the heterogeneous case. So I have been working with homogeneous frequencies for simplicity, but in the paper you can see also that this works when you have heterogeneity. The structure of the fluctuations can be informative, sometimes tell us something about what the model is happening, like I did in the Kuramoto model. The Odanton can offer valuable insights, like we saw in theta neurons. And then I have several next steps in which I want to study, of course, the exact macroscopic representation of these theta neurons, which is now in preparation, as I showed you. I think I started with a very complicated, large constraint, which is mean fit. But using techniques from disordered systems, it is possible to actually extend the theory for sparse networks, which would be a very big deal. And I'm curious about if this phase ansatz is something that is particular of the Kuramoto model, or it will be extensible to some other cases, or in which conditions it works, because it will simplify a lot the way that we treat our systems. So I would like to thank you for your attentions. Give some thanks to Anna Levina, which was my postdoc supervisor at Tübingen and supported me a lot while writing this paper, and Nicolas Brunet, who served as a very nice first referee to give me some feedback. So if you want to read the paper, there you have the link, and I will very gladly take your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very nice talk, and we have time for questions. So please raise your hands. We have one here.
Thank you very much. I was wondering, do these dynamics like the stochastic version of Kuramoto and the others, do they satisfy detail balance? Do the dynamics that you discussed, like the stochastic version of Kuramoto, does it verify the condition of detailed balance? But if it is detailed balance, then it's a dead brain, right? I mean, if it is satisfying detailed balance, it's somehow important, then it doesn't heat up. But then it's a dead brain we are talking about. So what is driving the system? What is the physics driving?
Thank you, Victor. Nice work. I was out of ignorance. I was curious about adding noise to the Kuramoto model in the way that you have presented. it doesn't violate invariance under rotation. So because you're putting Gaussian noise, but in principle the phase should be periodic. Is that okay? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I actually checked this explicitly. So when you find, let me go back a bit there. Sorry. So when you have these kind of equations, for example, and you apply in the microscopic model, you say, I want to see if I have rotational invariance. You can just apply the transformation. And what you see is that these equations remain invariant always. And the noise, the fluctuations, nothing changes. So everything, including the stochastic fluctuations, are rotational invariant.
Any other question? No? Okay. So maybe we can move on. Thank the speaker, girl, please. And we can move on to the next speaker.
You send me, no? Sorry? Yeah, but I cannot find your mail. Wait a minute. Okay, let me check. So what is your email? Ah, this one. Okay. It's in this. Okay. It's,
Okay. So our next speaker is Madalena Sass. And her talk is titled Sync Life, Collective Motion Induces a State of Connectedness, an EEG hyperscanning study.
Aquí pronuncias portugués. Sí, sí, ahora se veía.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and for listening to my talk. My name is Martina Sass. I just finished a PhD at Imperial College, and today I will tell you about an amazing project, which is a collaboration between scientists, psychologists, artists, and we are using it to study collective behavior and collective intelligence in humans. So, what's really the motivation? As it's already been mentioned today, we are fascinated by this collectively intelligent, self-organizing behavior in nature. So, a lot of this behavior also manifests as some sort of synchronization and as some sort of movement. So we can see, and it was just mentioned in the previous talk about this kind of critical states, which are very efficient and very adaptive for groups of animals, which allow them to kind of act together as if they were one. So, can we see the same thing in humans? Yes, we can, in all sorts of different behaviors. Not really what you expect, like a lot of the organized human behavior actually does not come from self organization specifically, but there are some very important cases, such as protests and marches, audiences, large ritual behavior, improvisational artistic experiences in groups such as dancing and music, pedestrians, and many more. And these experiences and these behaviors are not just characterized by being very adaptive, but also they are associated with some sort of state of mind. So we're also really interested in answering the question of what is it like to be in this kind of sense of togetherness, and is there any relationship between the act of collective motion. So in here we have a cinema audience. It is known that cinema audiences, if they're engaged with the movie, they would synchronize their breaths and a lot of the movement, they would lean forward where something interesting happened and sink. And then on the other side, we have a wave that manifests a lot in all sorts of sports events. And again, in those cases, people report a state of mind in which they are very connected to everyone there. It's a sort of collective effervescence and state of hope. So, motivated by all of these ideas, um, we take an embodied and an active approach to this kind of research, which suggests that movement, cognition, and experiences are intrinsically linked. And we want to study movement as a proxy to understand its collective experience and collective intelligence in humans. And we start with movement, and then we move on to all sorts of other methods of investigation. But movement acts as a very important um, baseline or way to verify things, because movement is much easier to quantify and measure than feelings or brains or intents or agency and things like this. And so, inspired by some interesting kind of psychological aspects that relate movement to collective experience and behavior. We know, for example, that, as I mentioned earlier in the cinema, cognitive processing of a common stimulus synchronizes brain's hearts in the direction of gazing and focusing of eyes. And physical synchrony between humans facilitates reported learning. So people do some sort of synchronized exercise together, like marching in sync or like singing a song. After they do that together, they are slightly better at working in a team on an unknown task. And this is also associated with the idea of a group flow state, in which everybody has a sense of flow, but it's very difficult to tell whether it comes from themselves or from someone else. So we wanted to, on one hand, study these kinds of experiences, and on the other, understand how they appear and see if we can recreate it. So in this great collaboration, we, on one hand, take the approach of of using information theoretic methods, and on the other, we have built an experimental technology, which I will describe next. But to start, we want to measure this kind of collective movement, right? And we want to understand how can you quantify the idea of everyone being together and acting as a whole. So we use this idea of meteorological emergence, which has been introduced by Fernando Rosas and Pedro Indiano and collaborators. And we want to assess whether we can measure emergence from the relationship between the parts and the whole. So we take, for example, in a group of people or in a flock of birds, we consider each individual uh, an individual part of the system, and then the collective behavior, say the movement of the whole flock, or some other variable that emerges and describes this collective. And we want to see what is the relationship between these variables that describe the parts and the variables that describe the whole. And depending on these relationships, we can think of different kinds of emergence. So, for example, we can, in the case of just, let's say, plain causal emergence, we observe that from the interactions between the parts emerges something collective which has synergy, and it's difficult to predict from the parts alone because the whole is greater than the sum of parts. But then this whole property can also become decoupled from the interactions between agents. And furthermore, it can then affect the individual behaviors of the agents from the top down, so to speak. And an example of this, for example, is in society. We have social norms that kind of dictate how we behave. And then, but also, we elect our structures that rule us. And then those structures in turn change how we behave and maybe how we vote in the future. So there's this feedback loop of between the whole and parts. And so in order to measure this, we use partial information decomposition. So the idea is we have the mutual information, which is fundamentally bivariate and it will be reduced by channel. But then, of course, we can ask questions about how does this group of variables relate to this group of variables. So in the simplest case, we have that we want to use two variables to predict a third. So to kind of extrapolate this to our idea of causal emergence, let's say we want to have a number of individual variables and we want to predict a systemic variable using them together. So in the case of going back to the case of the two variables predicting the third, we can think intuitively that each of the variables will bring in some sort of unique information that only it has about the target variable. But then there is some information that the two will bring in common, which is the redundant information, the overlap. And then there is, furthermore, sometimes we observe with this mysterious and mystical information that spawns out of nowhere, that exists in the target and is not really in any of the sources individually, but only exists when they're taken together and is not overlapped because it doesn't exist in either of them and it only appears when they're together. So now we want to actually quantify this mutual information and to define which is the whole, which is the part, which is the synergy, which is the tendency. And in 2010, Williams and Pierre introduced this formalism of partial information position, where, so we have an example. The example that you see in the diagram is also in the diamond shape over there. And the idea is at the bottom, you have this information lattice, and at the bottom, you have the redundant information. At the top, you have the synthetic information, and each layer kind of contains a little bit more than the one before. So by using this formalism, we can then apply this to the mutual information between the two. And if we take this mutual information to be time delayed, we have this kind of Granger causality approach where we say that information is a measure of prediction. So then we can say, okay, well, if the parts of the system can predict their future behavior better than the whole, then maybe there's not much synergy and nothing interesting happening there. But then if there's information in the whole that doesn't exist in the parts, then we can say, okay, there is synergy, there is something collective happening. And so we, process Mediano again, have put the synergy redundancy index in the context of this theory. And the idea is, okay, if we plainly subtract the information from the parts, the sum of parts from the whole, and we get a larger number than zero, then we can say, okay, there is synergetic information there. And here's an example of applying this to flocks of birds. This is population of the Reynolds flocking model. And we take this information, we take this whole to be a systemic property. And in this case, we said, okay, let's simplify things massively. Let's take the center of mass of the whole flock as a systemic property that is connected. And if the center of mass can describe the movement of the flock better than ordinary individuals, then we can say, okay, this flock is actually acting as one. In a similar way in which when you're trying to track the movement of a person, you don't necessarily need to track every limb. You can just tell that they're moving in one direction if you track their chest or their head. So there's this sense of togetherness which we can measure in this way. However, when we look at systems for the many components, so we go beyond like 3, 4 variables, even 10, and then of course bigger system, we incur some issues which are related to the fact that when we make this subtraction of the sum of parts from the whole, we actually are subtracting the redundant information, the overlap, multiple times, right? Because every time we subtract the information that each agent provides to the group, we're also subtracting that information that they provide in common again and again and again, multiple times. So we call this double counting. And again, Fernando Rosas and Pedro Emiliano, my colleague, Harvey Crashpile, and myself, and others, we've been working on trying to fix this. And they proposed an extraordinarily interesting formalism in which we can actually use the information lattice that I introduced before to break down all of these bits of shared information and then add them back if we subtracted them too many times. So we have an example on the right. At the top, we can see how we're trying to obtain the synergy, which is at the top of the lattice, by subtracting from the whole information the information in the parts, which is at the bottom. And there is a double counting of the information at the bottom of the lattice, which is the one that exists in all the parts together. And then if you go one layer up, that is the information that exists in all groups of parts of size n-1, and so on and so forth. So we can make these groupings of all the different components and say, okay, when you take agents all together, they have some shared information, we can add that back. But then if you take groups of size X, each of these groups will have a multiply counted quantity of shared information. And this formalism is very interesting because we can balance between computational accuracy on one hand, and between computational efficiency on one hand and accuracy on the other, because there is a problem of state explosion when you're trying to find all the possible combinations of all the possible agents and compute information. So now let's revisit our synergy and dynamics index, and instead of only subtracting the parts from the whole, we can also add back this intersection that exists in all the components together. So to kind of give an intuitive example, we're back to our flock of birds, and all birds are birds. They are the same species or they have the same kind of agent. So of course they would have some kind of information and behavior in common. And you see this in all sorts of other simulations as well, because you add some sort of noise, and then the fact that all the agents have the same kind of noise will reveal some shared information. So we want to mitigate this by trying to adjust our criterion so that it's a little bit more accurate by subtracting the double counted information at the bottom of the lattice. And here's a little sneak peek on testing this on the Reynolds flocking model again and on a school of fish. And in the original, with the original criterion, without readjust for redundancy, we see that, for example, the configuration on the left, which is kind of boring and redundant, but it's still a collective action. All of those birds are all flying together. They don't have very much synergy because they're all the same, but still they are doing a collective action. So we are interested in being able to quantify that with our criterion and would like a positive psi value. And when applying this redundancy and adding it back, we indeed obtain a positive psi value for the super redundant case. In the fish case, very interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, that like birds will be the same species and so on and so forth, the fish move quite similarly to each other, and they were also constrained in the tank. So there's all sorts of factors that, in a way, create this redundancy. And if we did not have the redundancy correction, then the fish would actually not be detected as having emergent behavior because of this overwhelming amount of redundancy. So furthermore, once we build all of these relationships and we calculate all of these time delay future informations, we can then create some sort of information networks in which we take all of our pairwise or higher than pairwise mutual information calculations, and we try to build a network, and we look at its properties. And of course, because all of these agents are very similar and the information spreading is very flat, because there's not necessarily like a leader or anything like that, we will have a lot of redundant links. So we use the method of backboning to remove some of these, which is packaged by Michele Cosia. You can find it on the internet. And to kind of jump a little bit back and forth, because there was EEG hyperscanning in the top title. We wanted to try to use methods that measure synchrony and also measure signal complexity in order to study the brain signals, and I will talk a little bit more about this later. So now let's get to SyncLive. After we've gone through all of the meanders of mathematics, we are ready to present the system. So SyncLive looks like this. It is a beautiful collective experience. It's been designed by artists, scientists, and psychologists together. We call it social sculpture because the artistic experience is kind of created by people moving together in really beautiful patterns. And the lights that you see on people's hats, they are synchronized at this time, but they're not synchronized normally. They flash all over the place like a flock of fireflies. And once the people are actually moving collectively, by design, the lights slowly begin to synchronize until when they are moving like a flock, the lights are synchronized. And the way this works, it's all built with Raspberry Pis. It's actually quite simple. We have a Raspberry Pi camera at the top that is recording the lights on the hats and doing object detection and tracking in OpenCV in order to get the trajectories and the position of each person. And then in exactly the same way in which we apply the causal emergence measure on trajectories of birds and fish. We apply it on the trajectories of the people. This is computed in real time. So for at least 10 agents, it is possible and it is sufficiently efficient. So that's also why we go only for the first layer of correction and we only add back one type of redundancy because if you start doing more, it would not be possible to do this computation in real time on a Raspberry Pi. We always have to keep these in mind when you know these trade-offs when designing experimental technology. So the headset is basically, as I mentioned, the Raspberry Pi with LED lights and a power bank, and it gets signals directly from the camera system, which has a little Raspberry Pi camera which we can build, and then we put this up somewhere high up, and we're trying to run on it this real-time software that then sends signals to the hats to synchronize them. So using the system, we had two experiments. The first experiment happened 3 years ago at Imperial College. We had 185 players in 19 groups, and they were given 10 minutes to win the game. And the task was work together to sync your lights without talking, touching, or ever stopping your walking. And we asked them some psychometric questions because we are interested in the experience aspect, and also we took some interviews about the emotions. The second experiment happened this year, and we had a chance to equip 2 out of our 10 players with EEG headsets, which are portable, and they were set up in a hyperscanning setup, so synchronized with each other, so that we can look at the relationships between the two. We had only 50 players in 5 groups this time, but we knew a little bit more about the demographic. They were all friends; they knew each other, so we gave them 5 minutes for each task, and we give them 3 different tasks. The first task, zombie, is a baseline. We just told them walk around, don't pay attention to anyone, be in your own mind, try not to think about anything, and this was to kind of get the baseline for the each. Then we have a game called Frenemy, in which we tell them avoid the person to your left while following the person to your right, and that creates these kind of very cute chases, but it also makes people engage very much with each other. It's a very interesting game. You give them like a self-organizing rule, and then they start playing around. And then finally, the same task of synchronizing your lights, but this time they only had 5 minutes because we assumed that having them play the frenemy game before would prime them and teach them how to play this game. So we use mental lab EEGs to measure their brain signals, which also have a measure of acceleration and gyroscope. And we also ask them some psychometric questions similar to from before. As for the EEG setup, we had EEG cap with 8 wet electrodes by Mental Lab with this non-standard layout that has these 9 and 10 electrodes recommended by a Mental Lab. And the EEG set has an amplifier, the accelerometer and gyroscope, and they aim to perform on-the-fly cleaning. Didn't really work, but what can I say? We recorded at 250 hertz, and the max voltage is actually a little bit higher than your usual EEG setup because of the boosting amplifier that you have on it. So, moving on to the results. In the first experiment, we asked these 19 groups to try to synchronize their lights, and after throwing away a few groups because there were issues with the data, we were left with 16 groups, and of these 16 groups, 10 were able to optimize the emergence measure and synchronize their lights and achieve collective behavior. And you can see in this graph at the top, it's kind of a group average with the standard deviation of the psi value in the last 20 seconds of the gameplay. Then you can see how everyone kind of in the last moment finds the solution, while as the people who have not found the solution kind of stick at the negative value all the time. And at the bottom, we can see some example trajectories of the groups. So a winning group on the right, there are very beautiful collective patterns. And on the left, you don't really have anything going on, right? And the people on the right are really incredible. They designed a sign language for each other. So that's a case studies from a specific group. They designed a sign language from each other, and they would sit and coordinate with each other so that they can form this figure of 8 and all the other interesting shapes. People who have won have reported that they feel more connected to the others. We use this questionnaire, the connectedness scale, which was used in psychedelic research. We also asked them about how good they are at walking in other people's shoes using an empathy score for perspective taking. And we also asked them if they were aware of the strategies they were using and whether they were working. And we found out that people with more ability to walk in other people's shoes, it does not really make them win the game, but it makes them enjoy the win more. While as about strategies, we found out that actually the more you are aware of your own strategy and of your own contribution to the game, the more likely it is to win the game, which is really interesting because this is a collective task. So we also asked them about their emotions and experiences, and they did report um, feeling connected and curious. They reported a lot of words that have topics associated with groups and social effects, but there were also a few like negative emotions, which were particularly correlated with people who didn't win. And we have these very interesting patterns of movement, which we analyzed with the networks, where we observe a few very specific patterns that you can see in nature as well. So we have a milling behavior, swarming behavior, or moving in a line, and these are all characterized by different kinds of mutual information networks. So as I mentioned before, when they all go in a circle, then their behavior is quite redundant, their relationships are very tightly knit, and it's very difficult to untangle the network because the mutual information between pairs is huge. Um, then in the swarming case, actually the mutual information between pairs is not very high, so they're all going all over the place, but there's much more synergy. And then in the moving in a line case, there is not as much mutual information. And it's interesting because you see the different patterns of the networks, and these can characterize the different kinds of movement in a way that is more agnostic and more detailed than before. And then if we look at the information dynamics, this is the time decay. We have 4 seconds on the x-axis, and on the y-axis there's the mutual information. So we can, and the movements are the same. So circular, swarm, and line, and we can see different kinds of decay in the mutual information. And it's really interesting, for example, when they're moving in a circle, it doesn't really decay. You can still predict what someone's going to do in 5 minutes, in 5 seconds, because everyone's moving in the same way. Now, I would like to talk about the EEG, but it's really difficult. So the only thing that I will show is this image, which shows kind of how people were playing and running around. And at the moment, we were really struggling with cleaning the data because it's data during walking and running and so on and so forth. Therefore, I am more than happy to take any kind of suggestions and ideas on how to work on this EEG better and hopefully present it at the next one. And before I close up, I need to thank all of my collaborators who made this possible. Think Live is a project by Peter Giglione, an artist from the US, and then there are lots of other scientists and artists who have contributed, and without whom it would have not been possible to make this project happen. I will leave you with the Guinness World Record of the biggest group hug ever. Then you can read the Think Live print, and you can also check out the software. Thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much also for a very beautiful talk. Are there any questions in the audience? I'm sure there are, so keep thinking. I have one meanwhile. So I see this is the second time that we have a talk on partial information decomposition, and I see that there are some computational challenges about it. But at the same time, it seems to be capturing something meaningful and very rich. I was wondering, how feasible will it be? So you have shown something that you have this decomposition over time, and no, earlier when you have winning and losing games, but the question is not about that so much. No. Sorry. My question is there? Do you think that it will be feasible to have that kind of measure distributed in a network or in the people to see who is integrating the information, where the synergy is emerging, whether this could correlate with leaders emerging and this kind of movements and this kind of thing. Will it
So
be feasible?
that is a great question. We're actually kind of working on this at the moment. So we had, I mean, at the moment we're with groups of 10, and that is very positive. Like we were able to compute the finest grain lattice decomposition on groups of 10. And so we are still working on figuring out what's the best way to measure the synergy in these higher order things. And there are some new software packages that have been released this year which compute very efficiently higher order interactions. And probably there will be people talking about this more tomorrow. And the idea at the moment, yeah, we're working on it and we're trying to see if we can correlate it with leadership. So we're trying to organize an experiment where we do tell people who will be the leader so that then we can compare in one that's self-organized with one that is a leader. And we have a few directions like calculating higher order synergy and redundancy and then seeing how many people do you need to remove from the group until it all breaks down. So we have a few directions and a few strategies, but I can't give you anything clear right now. We haven't finished the results.
Nice to know that it's feasible, though, because it seems very informative about the
Yeah, I
dynamics
mean,
that emerge.
20 makes me cry, but 10 is fine. So I guess we'll see that's the balance between accuracy and.
Any other question in the room? No? Okay, then thank the speaker again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have a final talk before lunch, which is coming up to the stage. So while we set up the devices, our next speaker is also from the house, if I'm correct, Alejandro de Aro Garcia.
Por otro lado.
And the title of his talk is Emergence of Chimera-like States in Reaction Diffusion Icing Systems.
Sí, está.
I think by now everybody knows Joaquin's password. So
Cool. I'm not familiar.
Okay, we got it. So now, for real, Alejandro Bearo, please, the stage is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alejandro. Today I'm going to present my work that I did for my bachelor thesis. I'm going to present it in a more storytelling manner so you all know what worked, what didn't, where we got stuck, and where we didn't. So it started more or less 1 year ago when I approached Joaquin for a topic on my bachelor thesis. And we were discussing a bit, and eventually we came to this topic of chimera states, and these were some states that were described for things like Kuramoto networks, hot field networks, but they had not been yet described for things like Ising models or any type of binary network model. So we tried to find it, and that's it. I'm going to tell you what is a chimera state. So if you have a bar of pendulums, several pendulums, and you just swing them like if you just get on a swing, you will probably get them more or less in phase relative to each other. If you just take the metal bar, you can't compare it to thermal fluctuations. You will get them probably out of phase. What is actually more weird to imagine is that you happen to get them, some of them in phase, some of them out of phase. It's also funnily Greek. The name comes from a Greek monster, the Chimera, which is a mix of a dragon, a snake, and a lion, a snake, and a goat. Why do I think they are cool? They can be described in several types of networks. For example, in neuroscience, and they have been described in things like unihemispheric sleep for some cetaceans, like dolphins. This happens in which a hemisphere is completely synchronized while the other hemisphere is completely desynchronized. They have also been described in reaction diffusion models like the Belousov-Sapotiskin reaction. They find spiral chimeras, and also in social networks like opinion models. There are also binary networks. It's weird because you can think of a city in which everybody goes to the same bakery, so you can assume they more or less interact the same way. You wouldn't naturally get to a situation in which some part of the city really likes the football team, some other part doesn't really like the football team, and some part is completely polarized. You would say that they are not interacting the same way, right? So we are going to do it taking the canonical model, the Ising model. As you all know, I'm going to be overly redundant here, but the Hamiltonian of the system of a configuration sigma is proportional to the sum over nearest neighbors. That's the original formulation in one dimension with negative energy because you want to minimize the energy, and ferromagnetic interactions because you want to get them aligned, right? And you can get with this, assuming a Markov chain, and you can derive a master equation that gives you the rate of change of the probability of a configuration in time. It's you can express this in terms of transition rate from state sigma to state sigma prime, and this will give you hopefully the evolution of the system. These transition rates are proportional to many Kronecker deltas, but they're also proportional to the metropolis transition rate, which is equal to 1 if which is a probability that is equal to 1 if the change of the energy between one configuration and the other is equal or negative, is equal to 0 or negative, and is equal to e to the exponential of minus beta, the difference of the energy, if this difference of the energy is positive between the configuration after and the configuration before, so that you can establish a way to distinguish if you do a change of the configuration or not. We know that this system is very much solved for one dimensions, for two dimensions, but we need some twist because we don't see this type of states in such system. So we did what what was logical to do, take the ingredients that make chimera states appear in any continuous model and try to apply them to our binary network model. In that sense, we did a non-local connections in which each spin is connected to R to the right, R to the left, and not connected to itself. And so you end up with a Hamiltonian that instead of summing over nearest neighbors, you sum over a connection matrix that you can express like this type of sums. Another thing is that these states are not described in any system that is Hamiltonian. Well, some Hamiltonian systems can exhibit chimeras, but it's not usually the case. These are non-Hamiltonian, non-integrable systems. So we also needed to try something that was putting the system out of equilibrium. And for this, we mixed two dynamics, the two most studied dynamics in the IC model, which is the Kawasaki dynamics, in which you exchange two spins, so that the Kawasaki transition rate is only one when two configurations are exactly the same, except that two are swapped, and the Glauber dynamics, in which the transition rate is only one when the difference between one configuration and the other is just the value of one spin. And so, but we connected them in a different way. So we connected each spin to R to the left with Kawasaki dynamics, and between RK and RG via Kawasaki by Glauber dynamics. So we get two non-overlapping connections that because we want to put the system out of equilibrium, the way to do it is in the global transition rate. We take one spin exchange or one spin swap with a probability P. That is, with probability P, you take Kawasaki dynamics. With probability 1 minus P, you take Glauber dynamics. This, until now, everything was satisfied, detail balanced. The two dynamics separately satisfy detail balance. There is equilibrium. There is no entropy production in equilibrium. But here we are taking an irreversible step, so we drive the system out of equilibrium. And the motivation for doing this very complicated network is actually put it in neuroscience. We can establish a connection between Kawasaki dynamics, which looks like diffusion, because you exchange the value of two spins, and compare it to electrical synapses in the brain, and these synapses can also be chemical in a more extended neighborhood of the neuron, and we do this by reaction dynamics, as we say, or Glauber spin flip. So we went for the hand of chimeras. We did it with Monte Carlo simulations, and this is the type of plots that we got. I'm going to explain very briefly. The x-axis is the spin index, the y-axis is the Monte Carlo step, and the color is just the value of x spin. And we see that in the reaction diffusion model, they more or less all the time come to a steady state in which everything is completely polarized up or down. But in between that state, there are some, as we say, chimeras in the domains of these two regions, which are noisy, and these are couple oscillators, and they are all interacting in the same way. So one is synchronized, one region is synchronized, and the other is not. The problem with this is that when we get rid of the reaction part, and we only consider Kawasaki dynamics, it looks just a bit like thermal noise. It looks just a bit like thermal noise, and so it's the fact that it's chimeras between domain of different magnetization make us wonder if we are stretching the definition a bit too much. So we will try from now on to simplify the problem and consider only Kawasaki dynamics, only diffusion system. Uh, for now, the literature is going to be about these attractor states that appear that have very widely and mathematically very precisely described by Pesuti. And we also take the inspiration from the early work that saw chimeras in an Ising state network. The thing that they did is that they split the system into two modules. So we have two boxes, and the spins have intramodule ferromagnetic interaction, but intermodule it's completely ferromagnetic. So you are dividing the system in two, you are breaking the interactions in it. And so we were not obtaining these states that we wanted to obtain, and were stuck in there for a while. But this idea that they did this breaking of symmetry to obtain chimeras stuck with us. So we tried to change the proportion of up and down spins, and hopefully this will create the right imbalance for chimeras to appear. So that's what we did, and more or less we got this kind of states. And the first picture, it's a chimera state. We see that it's between domains of the same magnetization, so it has nothing to do with thermal fluctuation, right? It's still zero temperature case. And we see that it has like a collective random movement that's going to left and right, which looks pretty much like a random walk. These chimeras, if by this chance of random walk they happen to come across one another, they will merge into these attractors already described. But they can also happen that they coexist for a long amount of time. And so we computed the phase space for the two parameters that were most relevant to the appearance of these states. One of them is the initial magnetization that is also fixed because it's Kawasaki dynamics, doesn't change the magnetization. And another is the interaction range of the Kawasaki dynamics. And we see there are basically three regions in the phase space. Region C, it's only one chimera, and that stays forever. Doesn't change. And in region A, there are absolutely any chimeras, and in region B, we see that there can be more than one chimera, right? The thing is that there is a very clear boundary between region C and region A, and another more diffuse boundaries in the other two cases. We also computed the chimera's activity, that is how long-lived they are. And we see that in region C, they are completely long-lived, so they stay forever. That's the equilibrium case. And in region B, they don't stay forever. As a matter of fact, it's a simulation and it's a Monte cluster, and they don't stay forever. We cannot say that it's a equilibrium case. And in region A, they simply don't appear. And we also computed what is happening with attractors. So in region C, as we already said, there is no attractors, it's only chimeras. And in region A, there are attractors, and they are formed very much right after the simulation starts. In region B, they are also attractors, but they are formed much later in the simulation. And the number of attractors is also coarsening and it's getting wider. Some of them are getting wider in time. And that is happening in region A, but in region B, they are happening more because it's the region that chimeras coexist with attractors. To gain some analytical intuition about the problem, we are going to define something. We are going to go to the extreme case that we only consider one positive spin, all the rest are negative spins, and each spin can go by Kawasaki dynamics to a diffusion ball that we call, that is what is connected with each spin, and we define the diffusion ball like this, and they are all, the thing is that they are all negative spins. So the diffusion ball only has negative spins. And proposed exchanges are always allowed. That is, as all configurations have exactly the same number of positive spins, all for the positive spin, for the only positive spin, all the configurations have exactly the same energy. So all proposed exchanges are allowed, and they always happen. What if we keep adding a number of spins? Let's say they start differently at two different points of the network. eventually they will come together. That is a negative energy interaction because one spin is getting another positive neighbor. So we say that that is a negative energy interaction by the Hamiltonian, and the symmetric of a negative energy interaction is a positive energy interaction that is completely forbidden by the metropolis rate. Right? We call that type of configuration sigma 1 because every spin is interacting with only one positive spin. And what if we keep adding more spins? We can put 3 spins. They will eventually also come together. And the thing now is that for all of them to be connected to one another, the important thing is that the first and the last one are of not more than a distant arc relative to each other. That way, the middle one is always connected to the others. So it's important to just check the streams, and they will always be connected. Every transition that is happening between them is a zero energy transition, which cannot escape. This is a minimum of the configuration, a minimum of the energy, and everything else is forbidden. And this is noise in the chimera region. We say that there is a noise here, and we call already these chimeras, very simple chimeras, but already. And the thing that we see between the first and the one spin case and the two spin case and the three spin case is that the length of the diffusion ball, that is the number of the negative spins that can be exchanged with the positive spins, is always decreasing as we add more and more spins. So remember we said before that these chimeras are going through a random walk in the space. Now it's going to be more and more bounded as we add more spins. What would happen if, in this case, that we saw before that the range of diffusion was 3 to the right, 3 to the left? What would happen if we add 4? We see that for the first and the last one to stay coupled, it has to be a completely still state. So there is no such thing as a diffusion ball right now anymore. So it will be already an attractor state. We can generalize this mathematically by defining the general diffusion ball for any number of positive spins, which is going to be defined as the intersection between all the individual balls, constrained to the fact that the first and the last one are interacting, because this way we make sure that every spin is connected to one another, and we are in a minimum of the energy that we cannot escape because of the metropolis. And like this, also we can also explain the phase space. As a matter of fact, if we take sufficiently small number of spins, the number of positive spins will be smaller to R, and that is basically region C, what is happening there. But it can also happen that we have a very big system, and these states organize into chimeras, and they simply don't have time to collapse into attractors. And that is what the simulations revealed. So to conclude, chimeras are a natural state of the long-range Ising model. They are an equilibrium state, and which is a novel result, and it's also a novel result in the sense that these type of states are usually described in non-equilibrium systems. Analytically, we could predict stable chimeras also, but the simulations reveal that there are metastable states in which chimeras can coexist with attractors. There is a phase transition very clear that we confirmed by both theory and simulations, and the thing that we also did, the action diffusion model, also presented chimeras. The thing is that they are more or less what they are described in the literature for the continuous models. They are transient states, they are non-equilibrium states. So we said, okay, how can we interpret this? How can we make sense of this? And the fact is that the metropolis transition rate has a secret, right? I mean, it's one if the energy difference between one configuration and the other is minus or equal to 0. That is, in the zero temperature case, every simulation we saw until now was in the complete zero simulation, zero temperature case. So everything is no thermal noise. Is one even if there is a zero exchange energy. We don't we have a hard time as physicists believing in performing any kind of thing with zero cost, right? We don't believe in perpetual motion machines. We are not talking about quantum fluctuations of the vacuum. So we said, okay, what would happen if we didn't do it? And then we have to remember that we are not talking about um, we are not talking about we are not talking about a real system and measuring a real system. We are talking about a Monte Carlo simulation, and in the Monte Carlo method, the important thing is that the evolution of the system is not biased. So if we only allowed for negative energy configurations, it would be biased in the sense that it would have a preference for the first configurations that appear that is a minimum of the energy. But we can also try to say, okay, it still doesn't sound very physical, so let's try to do the Glauber update rule, which is a little difference in the zero exchange energy. Both configurations have the same energy. It will give a probability of 1/2 to go from one configuration to the other, and it will only go to the other with probability of 1 if if the exchange energy is minus infinity. So we tried that, and yeah, I mean they appear. We didn't compute the whole phase space, but they more or less look the same. And so where to go now? We can't remember if you remember the previous slides. There is nothing in the analytical treatment that we did. Very simple mathematics that was specific to the one-dimensional case. So in principle, we could extend it to 2 and 3 dimensions. And that's what we did. This is a 2-dimensional chimera, same only diffusion, only Kawasaki dynamics, zero temperature case, and only with the only thing that we did was the distance. The distance has to be the Euclidean distance. We tried different distances, but it's kind of debatable results. And we also we also found remarkable that these states appear when we introduce some kind of asymmetry. It was not in this case interaction asymmetry, like in the other work that SIM did, in which they split the system into two modules and they make them interact differently, but we changed the number of positives and negative spins. So we started with this. Maybe we can do it for explaining the unihemispheric sleep. For example, we have the brain and we have the corpus callosum in the middle, which is slightly less connected. We can say that it's less connected to that it has more restricted connections than neurons inside hemispheres. So we can try to use chimeras in that way, and we can also try to establish this framework of this methodology of thinking for looking for chimeras in any non-binary network like Hopfield networks. So finally, thanks for the attention. Thanks to all the professors who gave me class in this bachelor, and thanks to my family, friends.
Thank you very much. And once again, any questions from the audience? Yes, we have one. Yes, please.
Yeah. That simulation was without the manual. Yeah. No, it is stable. Yeah. In 2 dimensions and in principle in 3 dimensions also. We didn't. It's a hard simulation to do, but I think we can. There's nothing in the mathematics or in the reasoning that suggests that it's not. No, in 1 dimension it's completely stable. Eh? With thermal fluctuations, yes, if we increase the temperatures, in that case, in all the Kawasaki things, in all the Kawasaki dynamics, yes, it's stable. Because, yeah, it changes a bit, it changes slightly in the phase diagram, but not too much. Yeah. 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 Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the talk. It was nice. So, in terms of metastable states, um, did you, if I understood correctly, they always decay to the same kind of final?
Yeah, if we run the simulation long enough, eventually these chimeras are taking a random walk basically. So at some point, we think, we see that they will collapse into into attractors. The condition for chimeras to exist as an equilibrium state is given by solely the number of positive spins and the interaction lengths.
So you cannot have something like an avalanche that goes. I mean, I was thinking about metastable states in spin systems, in which
Yeah.
you go from a configuration to another, which is also unstable, but like I don't know, situation with some chimeras, and then you go, and this is metastable, but then you go to another situation with different chimera state or something like that, or does it make any sense? Or
Um, okay, it could happen the situation that two chimeras collapse and still the number of positive spins inside that region is less than the interaction range, so it will still be a chimera, not an attractor. Yeah, that, but there are not many more other cases that we saw or that we could have.
Any other question? No. If not, then I think that we have time for lunch. So thank you very much for your talk. And thank you all for attending this session. See you in the afternoon.
Please, before leaving, people that has talked in the afternoon, please check or send me the PDF of your talk before starting the session and check that everything is working properly.